Okay, so I'm Adam. Most of you in this room know me, but I'm an Oakland University graduate from last spring, graduating computer engineering, and I've been working for a digital marketing company called Hello World, doing Android development and just generic software engineering as well. So today I'm going to talk about Kotlin, which is a new up-and-coming programming language that is kind of all the buzz recently. Started back in like 2012. Um, Built by JetBrains, same company that does IntelliJ and Android Studio and other IDEs like PyCharm. And it was really just meant to be like a replacement to Java to make Java a lot easier to use for developers. A couple of years ago, some Android developers started picking it up, using it as a plugin for Android Studio, even though it was unofficially supported. But just a month or two ago, Android announced they're officially supporting it as a first-class language. It's going to come with Android Studio. And so that's why everyone's been talking about it recently, because this hipster language that everyone thought was a fad actually caught on, and even now Google's buying into it. So there's their website if you want to learn more. It's just kotlinlang.org, and it shows it's a lot more than just another language for Android. Since it runs on the JVM, you can use it anywhere Java's used. You can even use it in replace for JavaScript, and now they've got native support as well, which is fairly new. I don't know a lot about it. But this also highlights some of the reasons why Kotlin is really important. So it's concise. It drastically reduces the amount of code you use. I'll show you a great example of that. It's also got type safety, so Kotlin has the ability to completely eradicate null pointer exceptions. Depending on how you use it, you can never be guaranteed to never get one in Kotlin. Interoperable. One of the biggest benefits is you don't have to use it completely in place of Java. You can use the two of them together. So a lot of companies maybe didn't rewrite their whole app in Kotlin, but have started writing all their new code in Kotlin because it can still interrupt. And then tool-friendly, like I said, it's built by the same company that builds Android Studio, so the tooling is fantastic. So I didn't prepare any slides for this, but what I want to do is kind of give you guys a live coding demo to show you what Kotlin can look like here. So I'm going to start by, is this too hard to read? It's probably,
I can make it a little bit bigger.
How do I do this?
Wasn't it like file?
A few moments later.
Alright, that's better. Okay, so anyways, probably more effort than that was worth, but I want to start by, to really show you how much time Kotlin could save you and how much easier it makes on developers, I want to first show you what your plain old Java object would look like. So this is something you might use for a to-do list, where you have three properties: the description, the due date, and whether or not it's completed. And you might start by having different overload constructors, because you might want default values. Okay, well, I just want to create one, with a certain description, but I want the date to be today, and, is completed to be set to false. So we make this overload constructor that just takes in the description. It calls into the other. I'm not going to get into the Java specifics. This is just a way of setting default values. So I have a constructor for each scenario where, okay, I want to give you this information. Everything else just use the default. And then we have to use our getters and setters. Because they're private fields, we need a way to say, okay, well, give me the due date, set the due date, tell me if it's completed, it's not completed, and so on. We might even want to override this equals method. In Java, if you just check if two things are equal, by default it's going to use their reference. But really you might want to say, okay, well, I want to know if they're equal by value. They have the same description, due date, and completed, then they're equal. This one looks ugly. It's auto-generated by IntelliJ. I just did that really quick to show you. Same thing with hash code. I use their auto-generated version, which uses each of these fields to give this custom hash code. And even auto-generates the toString method, which tells you the class name, and then each field and what its value is. So what you can't see on this screen, unfortunately, is that this whole file is 83 lines long. That doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot of code here, and a lot that's pointless. These getters and setters do the exact same thing. I have to write 4 different constructors just to handle default values. I have to write this ugly equals method just to check if the values are the same. But let me show you what this looks like in Kotlin. And that's it. It's just one line. So obviously, it saves us a lot of time. Even auto-generating everything in Android Studio, that took me a minute or so to set up. But this just takes me a little time. And I'll break down why this is exactly the same for you. So when we call this a data class is something that exists in Kotlin, which automatically overrides the equals method, the hash code, and the toString, in the same way you saw them in the past. So if you give it a data class, it'll just take each field and check for equality. When you go to print it, it'll print the class name, and then all the fields just like that. You can still override those methods if you want to customize it, but just by using this data keyword, you get all of that automatically. I'll come back to this in a second. We give it a constructor, and we tell it, inside the constructor, my class is going to have a variable called description, a variable called date, and a variable called if completed. And it tells you right here, this is a default value of an empty string. This is a default value of today's date. This has a default value of false. And so, before I go into the JVM overloads thing, let's make a new Kotlin class real quick. So I'll show you in action how this looks. So, the cool thing about that constructor, right, is that I could just create a task, and I could just use an empty constructor with all the default values. Or again, I could say, okay, I give it a task with some description. And that still works, and so on and so forth. Semicolons aren't necessary in Kotlin, but still have it. And so on and so forth, just like in Java. The reason we need it here, though, this JVM overloads. So without this, all that Kotlin code that I showed you still works. But one of the problems, like I said, even though this is fully interoperable, if I didn't use this, and I tried to use the same file in Java, it wouldn't work. Java would only interpret that this class has one constructor. So what this annotation does is it tells the Kotlin compiler, make me a constructor for each one based on those default values that I gave it. That makes sense. So this is strictly for interop. If anyone's more interested, I wrote a blog post on it yesterday, and I can go into that. Yeah, so that's your first example of how Kotlin saves you a ton of time here. But I kind of spent a lot of time on that. But let's talk about other ways that Kotlin saves you a lot of time. So what I'm going to do, this is just a generic Android activity. I'm going to use Android Studio has an autoconverter that'll convert a file to Kotlin for me. And I'll use this to work with. So I want to talk about null safety too. I know that was a thing I mentioned earlier about Kotlin avoiding null pointer exceptions. Let's say like something you might do in like Java, right? And so this line here, I get a value for this floating action button, and then I set a click listener to it. So what happens when I click that floating action button? Now, if I was writing in Java, even I can do the same thing in Kotlin, but if I was writing in Java and I wanted to say, you know what, only set the click listener as long as this isn't null, because I don't want this to throw a null pointer exception, right? I'd say, okay, if this is not equal to null, which Kotlin is going to yell at me because in this particular example I've already said that it can't be. Let's try it this way. I want to get rid of the errors, but I'll come back to it. The errors are going to explain. But this is what you would do in Java, right? You first check, okay, if this is not equal to null, then set the unclick listener. Well, in Kotlin, there's another way to handle that. So when you define something and you just put as type, the way this looks now, this is what's called, I don't know if they have a name for it, but the Kotlin, as far as the Kotlin compiler is concerned, that's not nullable. If I want it to be nullable, then I put a question mark after it, which is saying, okay, well, this is an optional floating action button. It can either have a value or it could be null. Most of the time, don't even give it the option, but if you're interacting with Java, sometimes you have to. And the way we can handle that is Kotlin actually has this safe accessor, which is where I can say, okay, well, in the fab question mark, that's that unclick listener. And just by using this little safe operator, that's doing the if null check for me. So I don't have to sit here and remember to check if it's null or not. As long as I label this as optional, and I know ahead of time that it might be null, the Kotlin compiler, you'll see there was a little red line. It's always going to yell at you and say, hey, this could be null. You need to handle that. So this is a huge benefit. Like, if you label everything that you know is going to be optional as such, and you handle it all here, nothing is going to throw a null pointer exception. Went to a great talk at DroidCon New York by Christina Lee, who is an Android developer at Pinterest, and they've recently switched their app to 100% Kotlin. And she said that after they switched over and they went through and handled all these cases and they knew they were not going to have any null pointer exceptions, she said their peer reviews actually got a lot better because people stopped looking for nitpicky things like, oh, could this throw an error? And they're actually focusing on the logic in the code. So that's a big thing about how this increases like productivity for developers, right? If you know, statistically, null pointer exceptions are 40% of app crashes. You've eliminated 40% of crashes. It's a huge benefit. So that's another thing. I could go on for days. One other cool Kotlin benefit I want to show you guys that too is called extension methods. So typically in Java, if I wanted to do something like, I'm not going to show the Java version. Let's say I want to do something like take a Boolean value and get it back as a 1 or a 0. And I want to write like a static utility method so that I'm not doing a bunch of if statements everywhere. And just do, utility that get Boolean as number and give it the thing. Well, Kotlin has what are called extension methods, which allow you to do the same thing, but without really realizing it's a static thing. So let me show you what I mean. So I'll create a file, call it like Boolean utils. And the way to create an extension method is I want this to be an extension of the class Boolean, and I want to give it a method called, as integer. And this is going to return an integer. And so what this does is think, another way I could do this is I could write my own subclass of Boolean and give it my own value, right? And then just use that everywhere. But that's a hassle. Who's actually going to do that? But here, pretending it was, okay, well, we'll say, if this is true, return, this is how you do it in Kotlin. If this is true, return 1, else return 0. It's kind of how it looks in Kotlin. It doesn't have the fancy ternary operator. It actually uses if and else as an expression. So I actually got called out. Fun fact for you guys. We were talking about this in the Kotlin Lang Slack, and I use the ternary operator all the time, which is like the little question mark and then the colon to switch on stuff. And I was kind of mad that I couldn't use this, and it was kind of confusing. And I referred to it as unreadable because I wasn't used to it. And someone said, I don't know how you can argue that if and else is more unreadable than a question mark and a colon. And I realized that he got me. So the cool thing about doing this is now if I go into some Kotlin class, okay, and I create some Boolean, and I want to get that as an integer, I can just do as integer, as if that method already existed on the class. So instead of Java where you'd have to say, okay, well, my end equals utility dot get Boolean as integer, get the thing, I just use it as it's a normal class method. And what this is doing under the hood is the exact same thing you do in Java, but saves you all that time. It makes your code a lot more readable, I think, as well. So those are just a couple examples. Kind of hit like my 15 minutes. We could go on and on about what Kotlin brings, but I just want to highlight a few of those examples, how it saves you so much more time than Java. And you don't lose any performance. If you look at those two classes, like I showed you earlier, if you look at the actual bytecode they generate, it's exactly the same. So it's less code. You don't get a performance difference, but you don't lose anything either. And you can arguably say with all that less code, you're maintaining less, things are easier to debug, easier to read, all those benefits. Why the world hasn't switched yet, I don't know. But hopefully, any of you who are interested in Android development, hopefully you consider going this route instead of Java. So, any questions about it? No.
So it sounds like Kotlin actually shares some features with C# when you're talking about nullable types, default parameters, and extension methods, right?
It does. It does. Default parameter is one of my favorite things in C#. I don't think, you still have, you can have things that are null in C#.
Right. So, yeah, the way that nullable types work is a little bit different in
right.
C#.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is completely selfish, but I want to know for the app I was building, on Android or via Kotlin, is there any way to reduce that natural native 15 millisecond Android Auto latency?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because I know the iOS doesn't have that problem, but
Mhm.
Android is. I can't think of a way to like there's no way to remove that latency.
Yeah, I don't know of one. I don't
Maybe
think
we just
Kotlin
cut-
would change that sort of thing.
Um,
Kotlin does bring, I mean, it's kind of, I didn't get into it. I went over examples of Kotlin that work strictly for Java, but it does have a lot of unique Android extensions. Like, if you take a look at like this activity that I created in Kotlin, where we still have to do this annoying boilerplate thing where I call find view by ID. I give it the ID of the resource on the screen, and then I cast it to whatever type I want. There are Kotlin extensions where I can really just use like the ID itself without like skip this call, just use the ID. Why do I have to do this every time? It does other similar things like that save you a lot of time, but that are Android specific. But yeah.
So basically, everyone sees Java as this kind of very slowly non-evolving language that just fears change. Do you see the Kotlin developers adding new features to the language to keep up with the times, keep up with like different kinds of evolutions that programming takes place in?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, so it's still used for Java, but it makes everything easier. You know, like why do if you look at this Java class, why do I write all this stuff every time? Every Java object I create is doing the exact same thing. You know, so why write it? And that's kind of what they're thinking over at Kotlin. It's also a very active community. Their like issue track is very active. I submitted a bug to the Kotlin converter in IntelliJ, and it's already been fixed in there, which is pretty cool. But you know, like I said, you save all that and you don't lose anything. If I wanted to go in here and I wanted to say, okay, well, I can still override toString if I want to print a certain way. So you're not restricted to those benefits. You can still do whatever you want with it, which is really nice.
Interesting.
And it has lambdas as well, which I don't really want to get into, and all the other features of Java 8 that exist.
Right.
Yeah, I think they'll keep moving forward and do a lot of things that Java can't.
Awesome. Thank you.
You have another one.
yeah. What would be the best way to get involved with the Kotlin community?
So they have a Slack group. If you Google for it, that's really helpful. That's probably the biggest one. If you guys are on Facebook, HH Android is the Facebook group that all they do is talk about Kotlin lately. Start with the Slack, and it'll take you in a whole bunch of directions. One of the Slack organizers has written a book called Kotlin in Action, which I have and never cracked open. But there's a whole bunch of resources out there. But start with the Slack, and it'll kind of go from there. But one of them, actually, I should call this one out. Kotlin Cones, it's called, is this will link you to a GitHub repo. But when you pull it down, it's just a repo of all these like Kotlin lessons and test them there, and by default, all of those tests are failing. And so what you have to do is read the lesson and go update the code so that the tests pass. So it's a really neat way to learn like bite-sized pieces of how Kotlin works. 10 out of 10, recommend that one.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, no, keep it going, keep it going.
Wait, so how are you
There's
able
one
to
more.
how are you able to do so many things and be so many places just on a personal level? How are you able to do so many things in so many places at the same time? There's like hardly a hackathon or a place I haven't seen you. And like, how are you able to do that possible? You're like in every single community I've ever seen.
Do you like sleep? I mean, that's your short answer. And if it's important to you, you make time for it. So,
Amen.
yeah. Yeah, that's all it is. It's just, I make time for it.
That's awesome.
And I, like, shove the stress into, like, the deep parts and never, like, let them bubble up. But they're there.
How many name features do you have?
And it's around 5, plus the hoodie.
True.